Hello and welcome to the first video in a series from Oxford University Press for teachers of English. Throughout this series, we'll be looking at aspects of digital and blended learning. And the first title is Digital Literacy. What is digital literacy? Well, you probably know what literacy is in general, and it's a little bit like that, but of course, it's more related to digital tools. Now, if you think about the kind of content that we find online, that really illustrates where digital literacy is. For example, if you think about video on YouTube, photographs on Instagram, blogs on Blogger, or even comments on social media, this is all related to digital literacy. Basically, literacy in this sense is about using, understanding, creating, and evaluating content. So when we talk about digital literacy, we're talking about using, creating, evaluating all of those different types of content I mentioned before. The video on YouTube, the blog on Blogger, or even the comment on Facebook. All of this is digital literacy. Why does digital literacy matter? Well, if you see a photo online or a video online, how can you be sure that it's real? If you communicate with someone online, how can you be certain that they are who they say they are? These are the kind of questions we need to ask, and this is why digital literacy is really important, not just for us, but for our learners as well. What can you do then to help your learners? Well, I think for a start, you can ask the following questions. Do your learners find entertainment online? Do they do shopping online? Do they communicate with other people online? Now, my guess is that the answer to most, if not all of those questions is yes. So clearly, you could say that your learners don't have any problem in actually using digital tools or interacting with digital content. But you can also ask further questions which are looking at these areas in a bit more detail. So for example, if they're using online entertainment, is it actually legal for them to use it? For example, if they watch a film, is it legal for them to watch that film online? If they're buying something from a shop online, is it safe? If they give their parents' credit card number, is it going to be a problem? Even if they just give their email address, can they be sure that it's not going to be used for something else? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, if they're communicating with someone online, are they sure that the person they're communicating with is who they say they are? These two questions, unfortunately, in most cases, I think the answer is no. They're not sure always who they're communicating with. Maybe they're not always sure about the safety and the security of websites. And I think this is where you as teachers can really help. If you think back to the original definition of digital literacy, we talked about using, understanding, creating content, which I think for our learners is not too much of a problem. In general, learners will be able to create content or use content online without any problem. But in terms of evaluating content or evaluating websites, for example, that is where you as a teacher can really help, because that's where these issues of safety, security, and being certain of who you're communicating with come to the fore. So evaluation of digital content is one of the key areas of digital literacy that you as a teacher can help your learners with. First of all, think about who actually made content. Now, that's important for lots of reasons. First of all, of course, if somebody creates something, it's generally their content, unless they agree to share it in some way. It's also important, of course, to help us judge if something is real or not, or likely to be reliable. Secondly, you can evaluate content in terms of whether or not it's safe. For example, if you give your email address to a website, is your email address going to be then used for spamming? Something to think about every time you hand over your email address. Finally, in terms of security, you can also think about protecting, especially younger learners, when they're online. So for example, if they're communicating with other people, it's best that they do it in safe environments. And there are lots of websites, for example, or gaming communities where they can do that. Before we look at some practical ideas for you to help learners with their digital literacy, I'd just like to address a couple of common questions which teachers, or perhaps even parents, might ask. Firstly, a common question is at what age learners start to develop their digital literacy. Well, as with literacy in general, it varies, but you're probably aware that even very, very young learners, young children, are increasingly confident at playing with technology and learning how to use technology. Now the important thing there is that I'm talking about using technology and not evaluating technology. That's an important distinction. One thing you might notice too, especially at secondary school level, is that the differences between ability and knowledge of digital content or digital content creation, the differences start to get much bigger between some learners. So I'm sure you might be familiar in your classes of perhaps one person being particularly good, the whiz kid if you like, the expert, that other learners and perhaps even you as a teacher can go to for advice. And that actually links to the next question, which is quite common especially among teachers. What if the learners know more than I do? Well, firstly I would say don't worry, it's quite normal. I remember when I was at school always helping my teacher plug in the television, and I think it's quite normal for younger people to be more confident, as I said, with using technology. But of course, you're the one who will know more about evaluating technology. You'll be the one who's aware of the issues and the risks around using digital content and digital tools. So keep that in mind. But also, secondly, do take advantage of learners who know lots about digital content and digital content creation. You can get them to perhaps lead mini sessions in a class. You could even go to them for advice. We've looked at what digital literacy is, why it's important, and also to some extent how you can help. Finally, I'm going to talk about some practical ideas. Now before I do, there is actually an information sheet about digital literacy that you can download, and on it you will find these activities in much greater detail, so you'll be able to practice them in your own classes. The first thing I'd like to point out in terms of practical ideas is actually very simple, but maybe the most important, and that is awareness raising. Now this doesn't mean that you do one activity on awareness raising. It means that every time you have the opportunity to address digital literacy, you just raise awareness among your learners by asking some simple questions. For example, if it's a website, do you trust this website? Would you use this website? Would you give your email address to this website? Now, you don't have to do this every time, but just repeating it every so often, these kind of questions, to get learners to become a little bit more critical in their thinking about what they use online. The second idea I've got is called class rules. You're probably familiar with these already. So for example, at the beginning of term, you might agree with your learners in each class a list of 10 things that they should and shouldn't do. And then you actually write them on a poster and put them on the wall. Well, you can extend that to include digital areas as well. Think about all those things which didn't happen in a classroom 10 or 20 years ago, but which happen all the time now because of the prevalence of digital tools. Mobile phones, for example. So in the class rules, you can include things connected to the use of mobile phones. Can learners use mobile phones in your classes? Can they take photos in your classes? If they can take photos, can they take photos of other learners? Can they take photos of you? If they can they share those photos? Where can they share them? On Facebook, online, or just within your class? There are lots of things to think about. I actually think you could probably spend a whole lesson agreeing the digital class rules with your learners. The next idea is also quite simple, and I'm sure it's one that you're familiar with, a class survey. This survey, though, is related to using digital content and digital materials. So, you can get learners to compare, for example, how much time they spend reading books and newspapers with how much time they spend reading online. How much time do they spend speaking to people in real life, face to face, and how much time do they spend communicating with other people online or via their mobile phone? You can decide on the details, but I've put some ideas on the information sheet so you can get started. I think a class survey is very simple, very quick, and very easy to do. And the results can be quite interesting, not just for you as a teacher, but also for the learners themselves, when they realise quite how much time they spend with their digital tools and digital content, and especially how much time they spend online. The final idea is called digital footprint. Now, on the information sheet, there's a short text to define that for learners, which you can use in your classes. Essentially, your digital footprint is your online digital personality. So imagine that it's possible to find out every website you've ever been to, every conversation you've ever had online, every transaction, everything you've ever bought online. Well, actually, it probably is possible to find out all that information, and that's why an awareness of your digital footprint is so important. Get the learners to read this short text, get them to reflect on what it means for them, and then a nice activity can be for them to design the perfect and the worst digital footprints. So they have to think about the kind of footprint which would be ideal, in other words, without any issues or any worrying signs. They also have to think about a footprint that would be the worst possible digital footprint. So this is good, again, for raising awareness among the learners about what's good and what's not so good with working online. That's the end of this video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you get to try out some of these practical ideas, because, as I was saying at the beginning, especially in terms of evaluation, digital literacy is really, really important for our learners these days.